Hello, everyone. Hi. This panel is called Waking from the Dream, the Realities that the World Needs to Face Now. But more accurately, because we're talking about gender, I'd like to focus it on creating the dream. You know, everyone knows right now, particularly, these panelists have some really amazing, interesting perspectives, but we know there are inequalities in pay, in hiring, in practices, which we were just talking about in the back, Maria, but we have the opportunity to create whatever we want. So it's my intention in this conversation that you hear what they have to say and that everyone gets to walk away with things that we can be doing right now to help solve the problems that exist right now in the world. I'd like to actually start this conversation with Maria. And just so everyone knows, Maria's background in computer science and in championing women in technology is tremendous. As president of Harvey Mudd College, which is a science and engineering school, that is somewhere that you play deeply. And so my question for you is, how do we get more women in tech, and how do we keep them there?
So, in my experience, it's very simple to recruit more women in tech and also to keep them. It's just that you have to create a supportive culture for everyone. You need to build confidence and community among the women that you've got. And then you've got to demystify success. And if you're if you're a woman or a person of color and not a member of the dominant group, chances are you're not getting nearly as much information about how to get promoted. And we know that half of the women who enter tech careers leave within the first 7 to 10 years, and it's usually because they don't think they have equal access to promotion opportunities. So let me tell just a very quick story. This is a story about Accenture. I gave a talk at HR 50 a year ago in the Bronx. Ellen Shook was there as the chief HR officer for Accenture. And she came up to me afterwards and said, you gave me some good ideas about how I could increase the percentage of women that we recruit.
And Maria, can you make sure that everybody gets this all the way in the back?
I am talking to the far back. Thank you. And so I saw her 4 months later, and she had told me when I saw her in April that they were hiring 30% of their engineers in India were female, and they were proud of that, but they wanted it to be more. So I saw her 4 months later, and she came up to me and she said, Maria, you won't believe it. We came in at 42% female this year among our engineers. And I said, so what did you do different? And she said, number one, we changed our job descriptions. We emphasized areas, in addition to all the technical skills, we mentioned creativity and communications and teamwork. We changed our interview process. A lot of ways that tech companies interview these days are really brutal, very adversarial, and not the kind of thing that most women are going to excel in. And then finally, we started recruiting at women's-only engineering colleges in India, also as well as at co-ed ones. 42%, up from 30%, was not hard, didn't cost a cent. So, if you'd like to recruit more women, that's what you do. You make sure your job descriptions, your interview process, and that you're also interviewing at places where there are lots of women. Of course, Harvey Mudd, we're about 50% female in engineering and in computer science, would be one of those places.
Yeah, and there are lots of, right? And she is definitely the woman to listen to, as a Microsoft board member. You weighed in on the Satya Nadella conversation pretty strongly. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
And you touched on confidence, and that is something, Hayley, that I want to talk with you about. Just so everyone knows, Hayley's one of the founders of Birchbox, and you led it to raising $72 million before becoming a VC now. You are no slouch in business, but I read this article the other day where she was talking about one of the biggest barriers that she has faced was confidence, which is an issue that women in boardrooms across the US and across the world face all the time. So can you give us a brief story about how that has really played out for you and and give people an awareness of the issue that confidence is for women.
Of course, of course. I feel like I should be on the couch since I'm being the vulnerable one talking about confidence. So first, let's clarify what I mean by that. Like, I've always been a type A high achiever, and on a rational level, you would ask me, was I qualified to get into Harvard University, Harvard Business School, qualified to start a company, and I would tell you yes. But that does not mean that in every situation I go into it feeling ready to go. Sometimes the night before you could say, am I the right one to do this? Am I going to be qualified? How is it going to go? How did it go? And in fact, there's been research done that this is more of a female trait, that there's a gap by gender in confidence levels. So it's not about competence, it's more about I'm less likely to self-promote, to raise my hand and sort of like brazenly say I'm the best at something. And I think where that really, in a specific instance, came into play was when we were raising our first round of funding for Birchbox. We had a very solid business plan. In fact, we'd already run a proof of concept. We had paying customers. We had beauty brands that were signed up. And we put together a really nice slide deck explaining exactly what we had done and what we would do next. But I think we were frankly a little too realistic and pragmatic about the business model. When venture capitalists, now that I am one, I know, are used to hearing pitches that are, I'm going to be the next Facebook. I'm going to change the world. And we were two women going into the room, competent and confident, but not, our business plan didn't have $1 billion as the 5-year revenue target. In fact, we hit our official 5-year revenue target in year 1. We were so conservative about what we thought we would do. So that was a big lesson for us. And we adjusted the message. We're able to raise that first round of capital and then went on to grow the business and raise $71 million more.
And you raised a really great point in that, women don't have a lock on lack of self-confidence. Everyone has confidence issues, but there are gender differences in that, and there are also cultural differences. I was talking to a French entrepreneur recently, and she was like, we don't do that. We don't run around saying how great we are. Like, that's something I've had to train myself into. So just the recognition.
It's almost an adjustment. Ask yourself, okay, what if I was incredibly confident, how would I say this? And being aware and asking yourself that question.
And for the VCs and the people listening to those women, be aware that they might actually be under-promising and
over-delivering.
Prepared to over-deliver massively. Awesome. Thank you. And Eamonn, I've got, hi. So Eamonn is here as, wow, are you the president of The Guardian?
I'm the CEO for North America.
You're the CEO of North America for The Guardian, which I deeply respect as a writer and as a human. And there was an article in The Guardian recently about San Francisco being the first state to fully require parental leave. We were talking about that backstage, and can you just speak to that?
Yeah, I think when you look at San Francisco as an example on the face of it, it's kind of like you'd have to say that's progress, right? For a country, when you think about what's going to happen in the next election, like parental leave will be there at the front end of domestic policy. Hillary Clinton's always put a case forward on that. So you look at that and say that you have to look at that and think of it as progress. But then you kind of put it into context. And you go, well, progress against what? Progress against federal regulation. So how does it work in the rest of the world? How can we, when you think about the US, how does the US sit relative to the rest of the world? And it's pretty much at the bottom. In fact, it's the only developed country or developed market in the world that doesn't have paid parental leave. And I'm a father of 3, so I talk about it having lived in other countries as well as to how that works. We sit, as a nation, the policy we have on this sits at the same level as Papua New Guinea, as Tonga, as countries that are still very much in the development phase. You look at Europe, and in many instances, most countries, it varies slightly, but you're talking about anywhere between 18 weeks to over a year of paid leave, depending whether UK, I think, is 33 weeks, Australia, where we have our offices, also is like 18 weeks. So when you put it in the context of the rest of the world, we still have a long way to go, and 6 weeks as a standard for the US is still wholly inadequate. But even when you look within the US, you go, well, how does that determine how companies behave? And I think the encouraging thing when you look at that as research is to say, just because the federal law might be this, when you actually look, particularly in California, and you look at Netflix or Facebook and Google and J&J and a whole bunch of companies, you see great hope that there is private enterprise that are setting a very different standard of what that can be. So I think it's interesting when you look at even in the corporate sector, there's this kind of, there's these two extremes of those who set their policies because what they believe is right and what believe is a healthy workplace. And there are those who set their policies as to what the minimum amount you can get by with under legislation. Yeah. And I think that gap is huge.
Well, and I love that you raised some very specific examples of companies who are getting this right. And this is a question really for everyone, like, who's doing this really well now? Who is paying attention to gender in a way that is solid? You said J&J and Netflix and Facebook are making some progress, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, okay, so we can review their policies, but who else is doing it well?
Yeah, maybe I could speak to that.
And this is, by the way, this is Kara. She leads McKinsey's IT, business, technology, and tech, media, and telecom practices. Is that right?
Yes.
She does a lot.
I also lead a lot of our work in gender research, specifically for women in tech on the West Coast. And I would say over the past several years, we have seen a huge increase in the amount of interest and activity focused on solving for the gender parity question. The good news is that we're a lot better informed. There's a lot of research out there. For example, McKinsey just released a report last year that said if the world sought gender parity at the level of regions, we could increase world GDP by as much as $12 trillion. Or if you just look in the United States and you look at the different states by region, and we got to gender parity within those, that's $2 trillion. So there's a lot of money at stake here for gender parity, and certainly some companies are increasingly focusing quite a bit on how they achieve it. So they're rolling out things like unconscious bias training. We talked a lot about the benefits. Parental leave is a huge one. They're talking also about fertility programs for women who want to wait for a longer time before they have children so that they have more flexibility around how they plan their life and their family, as well as in programs in the education space. So wonderful programs, for example, from Girls Who Code, that are reaching out and trying to get more women into engineering programs early, all the way through to college, where we've seen some great success, for example, at Harvey Mudd. So there's huge progress being made on multiple dimensions. That's the great news. The bad news, when we looked at this research, and there's another report I'll reference called Women in the Workplace, what we found that it's going to take...
And are these downloadable? People
yes,
can
these
find them?
are all available. I'm happy to point anybody to them, or you can find them on McKinsey.com. Our Women in the Workplace research said that it's going to take 100 years at this pace for us to achieve gender parity in the CEO suite. So we still have quite a long road to travel.
One thing that I love that you mentioned, it was beautiful. Like, I interviewed Dave McClure on stage at South by Southwest V2V this year, and he was talking about like why you should pay attention to diversity and women in particular. He's like, because they represent 80% of the spending power. Like, they're the ones buying the things, so you should probably have them on your team and designing things from the beginning. And I had this great conversation about someone who said, look, I built my team up to 6 people. I have a startup. I had to run as fast as I could to get this thing to market, and now I've got this team. When should I be thinking about women on my team? And it was a really innocent question, like not a problematic question, but what would be your answer to that?
So my answer to that would be, if you're going to do a startup, so it's a ton of work, and it's not a short-term commitment. So it'd be a really good idea to start thinking about what your values are before you hire the first person. And I would really hope that one of your values would be that you're going to have a team that works well together and brings diversity of experience and perspective. Because there's lots of research that shows you get better solutions to problems if you have people with different experiences. And so I'd say if you got to 6 and you hadn't thought about that, what were you doing?
Other people weigh in on this.
I totally agree. Diverse groups make better decisions. It's been proven, and you're moving fast in the first few weeks and months of a startup, but it is something that you can think about. Even if you don't end up hiring from underrepresented groups, you should be seeing those candidates. You should be looking at your pipeline, and you should be talking to the people, and whether it's you doing the hiring or the hiring managers, be talking about that it's a goal, that it's important for the culture of your business. And there's even decisions you make before hiring, like who are your investors? Do you have angel investors? Are any of them women? Because having those advisors, even on like the board or investor level, can also help you have that diverse perspective that could make the difference.
There was an HB article that I just happened to see on Twitter. It's like a gift from the gods this week that said, if you only have one woman in your candidate pool, you are statistically 0% likely to hire a woman. So to your point about making sure that that's part of the hiring criteria, you need to have plenty.
Just to build on that, it's also something where if you don't think about it early and you let it go and you say, okay, maybe when we become 20 people or 50 people, that makes it really, really hard. And so the problem of solving for diversity only gets more difficult the less diverse you are, right? Which is why it's something that you just want to solve for at the very beginning.
And it matters more and more to candidates. That 16th person that you're hiring that looks, even if it's a man seeing lots of other men, he might think that this isn't a workplace that values the same things I do.
And one of the things I've heard from the white male students at Harvey Mudd is that when they choose who they're going to work for or go to PhD programs, because they've had the opportunity of being a part of a learning community that is gender diverse and racially diverse, one of the first questions is, what is this company's commitment to diversity? And so if they look at a startup and it's all white guys, they're probably not going to go there.
And that's something that I love about the way the business community in our world is shifting. Like, there are more and more men. I was at an event at Harvard last week, and there was a man who stood up and said, this world won't work until 50% of the CEOs are female. And there are more men standing up and saying, like, that is necessary, that it, like,
we needed to have one man on this panel. Right.
Let's speak to us.
I'm a minority.
Speak to us, Eamonn.
As the minority speaker here today, I mean, the Guardian's a different business. If we're 50-50 split male-female audience, we're the only news company in the world, I think, that has 3 female editor-in-chiefs. Our newsroom is 59% female, so I think as a company in the US, so that's the US newsroom, in the US alone, we're 56% female. So for us, I have a sort of I guess part of the reason I'm sitting on this panel is, in the last 10 years, I've always had a female boss, and I've prospered under that. I think the balance of having a company, we're actually biased female, so the balance of that kind of leadership and how we think about things, right from the topics we cover, knowing that we have a very strong opinion on female leadership and equality, but it also comes through to this overall diversity thing. Like, if you're going to write about immigration, you care about it, then you should employ people who come from diverse backgrounds, and you don't want to be just a newsroom of grey-haired white men, writing about immigration or writing about racism or writing about all of those subjects. So for us, we don't think about the balance of male-female because we're dominant female already. We do challenge ourselves to say, do we recruit in other areas and the way we write? And I don't think we've got there yet, but I think we're certainly, the progress we're making is significant.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. Like, I feel like this conversation is all about gender and helping the rise of the female, but there's a way in which I also see the millennial generation playing in a way in which gender is becoming increasingly irrelevant. Once we get to parity in business, which clearly, according to those numbers, won't be for a while, I think gender lines are becoming kind of blurry.
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit on that, and not that, I mean, it's certainly true that gender lines are becoming more blurry, and so, for example, if I'd been born 40 years later, I'd be transgender male for sure, because I grew up as a boy, and everything I liked were boy things, and my life would have been a lot easier if I were male. But on the other hand, I think this idea that gender is no longer relevant, you know, my experience is, so I'm going to be 65 this year, and if I talk to women, say 5 years ago, who were 40 or so, most of them had grown up believing the gender issues were over. And as they rose, you know, into positions of vice president, it became clearer and clearer to them that it's not over, that it is really, really difficult to be female in many careers today. So I don't think that's going to change. I mean, it's not that the women who are 20 years old or 30 years old or 40 years old or 50 years old today are any less talented than the women, or more talented than women who are 60 or 70 years old. But it's amazing how difficult it is to change the stereotypes.
I love that you made that comment, and you reminded me of, you know, that is one of the reasons I was in the corporate world for doing corporate innovation for like 15 years, and it got increasingly hard to rise, and that's one of the reasons I transitioned. So what else do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting you raised the generational point, because and I'll use McKinsey as one sub-example, but I've seen this in other areas from the clients that I serve, which is there was a generation of women, most of them are now in their 50s, 60s, and their approach was, we're going to break through the glass ceiling. And the way that they did that was oftentimes by taking on some of the more male qualities, right, doing it in a way that was very much like the group that they were trying to fit in. And what I'd say is different about what we're seeing these days is there's more and more women from the millennial generation, some Generation X, who are saying, no, we're not going to do it that way. We want to make it to the top on our own and doing it our way. And they're trying to redefine what it looks like to be a woman leader. And so there's definitely some changes going on generationally. At the same time, there's also research to show, I think, from the HBR, which showed millennial perceptions as they start facing career challenges and more stresses, two-income families, they start conforming more and more into traditional gender roles within relationships. And so that was some disappointing news that's been found, but it's getting better.
Because we only have a bit of time left, I want to close this out, and first of all, thank you for all of that. I want to make sure that everyone here walks away with one thing that they can do or think about and go home and do today to start to shift culture where they work or in the businesses that they're creating. So can you just offer some advice?
I have one that you all can do right now, because you literally already have your phones out. Only 10% of seed funding goes to women. Only 15% of founders are female. I would like each of you to find a woman in your phone and text her and say, I think you would be a fantastic founder. And extra credit if you tell her exactly why. But more women need to hear that they can be starting businesses.
Yay.
Yeah.
Text them right now.
So if you're female, I'd just like to advise you to take a risk. Be willing to reach up for something that seems out of reach and go for it. If you're male, find a female in your community and encourage her to do that.
Amazing.
I would say for everybody in the room, and particularly the women, celebrate grit. And don't let anybody say no to you.
I would say, I think it's really important that we keep a balance to say this is not about a them and us thing. Yeah, it's just about equal representation. And when I think about, from a business perspective, I think about if you're going to join a company or work for a company, don't just look at the values that they talk about, but speak to people in the company and talk to them and feel if their behaviors match those values. And I think any company that is true to what they do in any aspect of diversity, I don't think there's any female that works in our company that wouldn't take a call from someone who was coming for a job at any level and tell them how it really is. I think there's too much chat. In our business, there's too much good talk, but you have to see if people really walk that talk as a business and live it.
Very good. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for being so attentive and listening. Very good.